When you hear that somebody is struggling with their mental or emotional health, what comes to mind? Any suggestions? For a lot of people, the answer is to speak with somebody or to go and see a doctor. What people may not realize, however, is that when you hear that somebody is struggling with their mental or emotional health, what comes to mind? Any suggestions? For a lot of people, the answer is to speak with somebody or to go and see a doctor. What people may not realize, however, is that the choice one makes in who they go and speak with will determine the type of help or treatment which they will be offered. This is worth focusing in on for a few moments. So let us assume that you're suffering from sleepless nights and your mood has been lower than usual for a while. You tell your friend and talk to your friend about it, and they recommend that you see a doctor. So you do, and you tell the doctor what's bothering you. They may suggest depression and to see a psychiatrist, and they will make an appointment for you and perhaps offer you something to help you sleep, a sleeping tablet or relaxer of some kind. All good. So you take the doctor's prescription, you get your medication, you get your sleeping tablets, and you leave and you wait and you attend the appointment with the psychiatrist. Again, you list your ailments with the psychiatrist as when you're talking to them, how you feel, what's been going on, and perhaps you're given a diagnosis and a further prescription for medication which is relevant to the diagnosis you've just been given. You may be told that you're suffering from such and such a disorder or a mental problem, and that whatever medication you're given will work in such and such a way. So the psychiatrist explains to you how these medications work. You're sitting there kind of eagerly listening and hopeful in the fact that this person has spent probably the best part of 10 years in education. They're a specialist in the area and they know exactly what they're talking about. They've done the research, they know how all these things work, they've read the research, and now they're giving you this wisdom, and also they're giving you this medication which will cure, which is what you want. You want whatever symptoms or whatever illness or suffering which you're experiencing, you want that to end, right? Otherwise, what's the point? So you leave optimistic, happy. You probably don't ask too many questions because from your perspective, you probably feel like the psychiatrist has done an adequate job of explaining not only your diagnosis to you, but also the medication. So you leave happy, ready to get over what it is you're suffering from, and you go home and you start your course of medication. So you leave the psychiatrist's office with a legitimate medication to cure a legitimate illness, and you've been given this by a legitimate professional, which is a psychiatrist. Now you're assuming that because they're a professional, they've been through their many years of education, that, like I said, they know what they're talking about. But do they? And do you know the ins and outs of what it is that this medication is supposed to be doing to you? You know, and the purpose of this video is we're going to be looking into that a little bit. You know, how medications get approved, who they get approved by, what they say they can do, and do they actually do those things? And we're going to look at the flip side of psychiatry as well, which is maybe not the flip side, but a counter to it, which is psychotherapy. So let us assume that we get a little bit curious about the medication we've just been given, and instead of just accepting that or taking for granted that these things have been validated and approved and legitimated through research, let's instead ask the question ourselves: if I was to create a medication for the purpose of curing or fixing depression, for example, how would I go about it? Who grants legitimacy to these medications? And I'll just go over a couple of them as well, because I'm sure each country have their own body, governing body or whatever, regulatory agency, and there'd be little point in going into all of them. But the first one is the FDA in America, which is the Food and Drugs Administration. And on their site, they put forward their intent as, quote, "The centre's best known job is to evaluate new drugs before they can be sold. CDER's," that's the Centre for Drug Evaluation and Research, CDER's evaluation not only prevents quackery, but also provides doctors and patients the information they need to use medicines wisely. The centre ensures that drugs, both brand name and generic, work correctly, and that their health benefits outweigh their known risks. This is important as well. We'll come back to that the words work correctly. We'll definitely be returning to that. What does the word work mean? They continue on in terms of how you go about getting approval from the FDA. They say that an agency expects that the drug maker will submit results from 2 well-designed clinical trials to be sure that the findings from the first trial are not the result of chance or bias. And essentially what this means is that in order to go about getting your medication, your newly created drug, approved, you'd need to show that there's a positive effect from this drug in terms of what it's designed to treat in at least 2 clinical trials, that is 2 designed research trials, which ended with positive results. That's what you'd need. The second body is the European Medicines Agency, or the EMA, and they state that the mission of the European Medicines Agency is to foster scientific excellence in the evaluation and supervision of medicines for the benefit of public and animal health in the European Union, or the EU. And how they have a little video, I'll put the link in the thing, describing how you go about the process of getting approval or getting regulated. So, and they state that the drug is developed, it's then tested in the lab, and if it's deemed beneficial, then clinical trials are conducted on people. And if they're deemed to be safe, if the drug is deemed to be safe in human use, then it's given the green light from the EMA. All this information then related to the research and the clinical trials is gathered, and it's peer reviewed by, I suppose, experts in the field of chemistry, biology, psychopharmacology, whatever you're talking about here. And then the benefits over the risks, if the benefits are shown to be greater than the risks involved in taking the medication, then it's deemed ready for market, I suppose, or it's given the approval to be readied for market. And an additional body then is the Health Products Regulatory Authority, or the HPRA, which is the Irish equivalent of the FDA, I suppose. And they state on their site that we are the Health Products Regulatory Authority, the HPRA, and our role is to protect and enhance public and animal health by regulating medicines, medical devices and other health products. It is also our role to monitor the safety of cosmetics. Further on, we use our scientific and clinical expertise to review and monitor health products available in Ireland or exported abroad. Our aim is to make sure that health products we regulate are as safe as possible and do what they are intended to do. Again, this is kind of reiterating the working correctly, or they're doing what they are intended to do. And we'll come back to that. We'll also come back to the idea of peer reviewing these things. So you get experts and they look at the available research, they look at the available information related to the area, and then they come to an agreement on it. So we're going to come back to that. It'll probably be a large focus of this part of the video. And finally, from the HPRA, they state that we actively participate at a European and global level for all products under our remit. This also gives us access to the latest product information and safety signals across the ever-evolving health product sector. So they're related to the EMA, and the EMA is kind of related, or they work a lot with the FDA. So if one is approved for the EMA, if they approve a drug to market, it's automatically approved in all countries in the EU. So we have these regulatory bodies, and they go through the evidence that has been conducted around the medicine or around the tablets or medication, and in order to approve it. But who funds these clinical trials from which this evidence comes from? And to a large extent, it's the pharmaceutical industry themselves, which makes sense. If you want the product to be pushed through into the market, but you need to research it first, you're going to fund part of that, because the end result might, or more than likely, you'll get back a lot more than you invest in financing the clinical trials. But like the problem that it results from this is that there's a natural conflict of interest there, because if you're funding a clinical trial or research on a medication that you want to get put into the market to turn over a profit. It's business. So you naturally want that research to come back with positive results. And in cases the industries are allowed to stand over and monitor and even call a halt to the research when it's being conducted. So for instance, if you have in a few weeks it's shown negative results, they can step in, they can stop the research, and also they don't have to release that research. You'll remember me saying the FDA, they just saw 2 well-conducted clinical trials that validated that there's a positive effect from the medication being put forward. But what they don't know is that they're not privy to all of the research or all of the clinical trials that have been conducted on that medication. So for example, if you have an industry and they've conducted 5 research trials on a particular medication and 3 come back negative, 2 come back with positive results, they can put forward the 2 positive results to the FDA and push forward for approval and regulation on that medication, while also withholding the 3 negative results, which is a massive issue because doctors and psychiatrists and even nutritionists and anybody involved in the field of health and medicine, they will make decisions based on the available literature and the available research there. So if you have industries that are continuously just pushing forward the positive research that demonstrates that there's a positive result from their medication or their product, while also withholding the research that shows a negative effect from it, there's a massive amount of data and information that doctors and psychiatrists, etc., that's not available to them. So they could be prescribing something that they think is good, but what might not demonstrate that it is good continuously, So there's a massive black hole of information there that industries just don't have to turn over all of their clinical trials. And just because a clinical trial got approved, like I'm saying, it doesn't mean that it's published. So when they put forward their 2 positive results, they could get published then in scientific journals and medical journals, which are what doctors and psychiatrists read. In some examples as well, the industries are allowed to conduct the analysis of the data once the clinical trials are over. So they get to play around with the numbers, and dictate what is kind of finalized in terms of what they're pushing out there. So 20% successful or whatever. And this naturally leads, again, there's research conducted. A study looking at research outcomes on 5 different types of drugs found that trials sponsored by industries resulted in an 85% positive result on the outcome of the drug, compared to 50% positive result from studies which are conducted by governments. And this research was kind of conducted on over 500 trials. So again, you can see what you would assume would be a natural bias is of we want our results to be positive. It actually ends up being that way as well. Just backing this up as well, there was research conducted in 2006, and I'll put the references and stuff at the end of it. And it was done on the trials were 98% of them were industry funded, and it found that 16 out of the 44 trials, the sponsoring company got to see the data as it unfolded, which would open up the door for them kind of stopping it if it was looking like it was going to be a negative result, or even stopping it early, because there might have been kind of good indications in the first couple of weeks, or a few weeks, so they could stop it then and declare it a success. Also, an additional 16 of the companies reserved the right to stop the trial when they liked, as I'm saying. So again, if it looks bad or if it looks early and promising, if it looks promising early, they can step in and stop it. So with the hidden data, what happens to the trials with the negative or the non-impressive results? In 2008, researchers attempted to see how many trials of antidepressant medications which were reported to the FDA actually made it to publication in academic and medical journals. and these were for between the years 1987 and 2004. The result yielded 74 studies involving over 12,500 people, of which 38 were positive, the drug worked, indicating that the drug worked, and 36 were negative, indicating that it didn't. Of the positive results, which indicated that the drug worked, 37 of these were published into the medical journals and to the scientific journals. So these are the results that doctors and practitioners would have read. Again, being unaware of the 36 that produced negative results. And of these 36, only 3 of the negative trials were published. So you have 38 results that showed a positive result, and 37 of these were published in academic journals. And then 36 trials which showed a negative result, only 3 of them were published. So you have a massive skew in the available information. And like I'm saying, the industries, they don't legally have to offer up all of the information that they have as a result of their trials. And they're kind of trying to push back on that now, the FDA, and I think they're trying to implement penalties per day where research hasn't been made available from industries. But I think the penalty is like $10,000 or euros, whatever, dollars a day. So over the course of a year, it's like 360 grand, which is nothing to these companies, considering the fact that they could be making hundreds and hundreds of millions a year, or even billions, so it's worth the cost. Another way that industries can kind of push forward their drugs getting regulated quicker, or even at all, is with after the fact payments. So obviously it would look dodgy if they were to give, an industry was to give an FDA panel member money before approving, or before they had to make a decision on the drug being regulated. However, an article in Science Mag, I'll read a quote: in examining compensation records from drug companies to physicians who advised FDA on whether to approve 28 psychopharmacologic, arthritis, and cardiac or renal drugs between the years of 2008 and 2014, Science found widespread after-the-fact payments or research support to panel members. Continuing on, Science further looked at research funding from a company to an FDA advisor directly or through their institution. They found that of 107 physician advisors who voted on the committee Science, that's the magazine, examined, 40 over a nearly 4-year period received more than 10,000 in post hoc earnings or research support from the makers of drugs that the panels voted to approve, or from competing firms, firms. 26 of those gained more than $100,000 and 6 more than $1 million. And continuing on, of the more than 24 million in personal payments or research support from industry to the 16 top earning advisors who received more than $300,000 each, 93% came from the makers of drugs those advisors previously reviewed, or from competitors. So you can see that it's a game, it's a business to a large degree, and I'm sure it's from people meaning well, and it's from a combination of people kind of being a little bit greedy, I suppose, being a little bit ignorant in terms of making decisions on what they're presented, instead of going digging around and actually looking or pressing these companies to release more of the information. Because if you're given a choice between a drug that looks successful 90% of the time versus a drug that looks successful 50% of the time and negative the other 50, it changes the landscape in terms of how you're going to make a decision on that, naturally. So what's the point of all of this? And I suppose it's a valid question. Because it'd be easy to look at it and go, yeah, look, it's just business and politics behind the scenes of how things are conducted. But what are the real world applications? How does this affect me? And for that, I'll just give an example, and there's probably loads more that you could look at. And go and look at them. I'll put links and stuff below where you can get this kind of stuff. I'll just give one example, and it's to do with the EMA, as the European Medicines Agency. and with fluoxetine, which is the chemical in Prozac. And I picked Prozac or fluoxetine not because I can point at it and go, haha, here's a case, but just because it's one of the most common ones. I'm sure everyone has heard of Prozac, probably above many of the other antidepressants out there. And I'll just read from their site, and this is a little bit of a writing on the chemical in Prozac, and it says, quote, the agency, that's the EMA, the agency scientific committee, the committee, which is the Committee for Medicinal Products for Human Use, concludes at its 19th to the 22nd of April 2005 meeting that suicide-related behaviour, that's suicide attempt and suicidal thoughts, and hostility, predominantly aggression, oppositional behaviour and anger, were more frequently observed in clinical trials among children and adolescents treated with these antidepressants compared to those treated with a placebo. So essentially what that's saying is, and note the year as well, it's in 2005, that clinical trials have shown that the intake of fluoxetine or Prozac leads in some cases to heightened suicide-related behaviour, with suicide attempts and suicidal thoughts, and in hostility, in aggression and anger, over placebo. So it's been shown that it is the drug itself, or it is the chemical itself, which is causing these things in people. And again, it gives another list of the tablets and medication that they've looked at and result of this as well. So they've put a mark on it that maybe there are limitations in terms of giving this drug to people of a certain age bracket. But where this is interesting is that this, no, again, like I said, it's in 2005 that they found this. But if you look back, there's been research done throughout the years, and this is one from 1999. And the quote says that psychological autopsy studies have shown that between 9% and 33% of suicide completers with major depression were receiving antidepressants. And this is interesting because it begs the question of, like, well, did these people kill themselves because they were depressed and they were being suicidal as a natural kind of runoff of depression, or were they depressed? Yes. Were they suicidal? Who knows? And did the antidepressants cause those suicidal thoughts and consequently the action? And this is in 1999, so 6 years before the EMA put that out, put in their study in 2005. So the information is out there, and if all of the information from the clinical trials was put out there, we'd best be able to make more informed decisions around who we're giving these drugs to, and when, and how much, and how many, and also the people that are taking them will be in a better position to say yeah or no to them. And again, this is another bit of research. It's from Ireland as well. And it says, quote, that data from 222 suicides were collected over a period spanning 1990 to 1994 from 3 regions of Britain and Ireland. In Britain and Ireland, 41, that's 18.5% of the cases had been prescribed one antidepressant within 1 month of their suicide. So again, were they always going to kill themselves, or did taking these tablets cause that, or lead that, or add to their desire to perform suicide or to kill themselves? So these are the real world implications of it. They could affect the person staying alive or not, whether they end up taking these drugs or not. And again, because of the information that's been withheld from industries, doctors are kind of just getting to see the sunny side of it. And the whole point of this video was just kind of to show you how these things come about. But there's going to be a second part of this, and I'm going to look at the efficacy of the medications themselves. What are they? Do they work? What does work mean? And also I'm going to compare that to the efficacy of psychotherapy and counselling. So that'll probably be a more enjoyable one